Two brothers, despised by their community, vanish after a spectacular bank robbery and a fiery desert explosion. But did the flames consume their bodies or just their identity? Coastal Ridge, in the early 1990s, was defined by its relentless, blinding sunshine and the casual wealth of its residents. It was a place of polished brass plaques and manicured lawns, where the biggest crime was usually an unpaid parking ticket. The Bank of Oakhaven, a fortress of granite and mahogany on the main square, was the unchallenged symbol of this quiet prosperity. It was here that Elias and Caleb Vance were perpetual outsiders. The brothers, raised in the shadows of the town's elite, were known for their brooding silence and shared, deep-seated resentment. Elias, 32, the elder, was methodical and cool, his gaze rarely meeting anyone's. Caleb, 28, was the volatile one, his frustration a visible, sweating layer under his thin skin. They lived on the margins, doing odd jobs near the marina, often watching the town's affluent residents enjoy the life they felt perpetually locked out of. June 14th, 1993, 10 a.m. The scent of salt and hot tar hung heavy in the air. Elias was meticulously coiling a length of rope in the belly of an old, fiberglass fishing boat named the Stray. Archive. Photo description: a grainy, slightly blurred photograph taken from a distance. Two men, heavily shadowed, load a large canvas duffel bag onto a small, faded blue motor yacht. The timestamp, barely legible, reads June 14th, 93, 9:48. Caleb sat on the dock, lighting a cheap cigarette. "You sure about this, Eli?" $3 million. It's not a fender bender. His voice was tight, a low rasp against the creak of the hull. Elias didn't look up, his movements precise. "It's the only way out, Cal. They think we're nothing. They'll never look for us where we're going." The words were low, almost whispered, yet they carried the weight of a decade of quiet fury. The Bank of Oakhaven was quiet. Only 3 customers were inside, alongside the manager and 2 tellers. Evelyn Hayes, a seasoned teller of 52, was precisely organizing her cash drawer, the rhythmic click of bills a familiar, comforting sound. She remembered the strange smell of ozone just before the main doors burst open. 10:27 a.m. 2 men in dark, ill-fitting ski masks, brandishing heavy-duty handguns, stormed the main lobby. The sound of the younger one's panicked shouting echoed off the marble floor. Elias, the presumed leader, moved with chilling efficiency, his voice flat, demanding compliance. "Everyone on the floor. Now. No heroes." Evelyn, trembling but focused, followed the protocol ingrained over 20 years. Her fingers fumbled to hit the silent alarm under the counter, a small, sticky button under a flap of worn paper. She never knew if it worked. Transcript: bank surveillance audio. Partial: 10 hours, 29 minutes, and 45 seconds. Voice 1, Elias, calmly move. Vault. Caleb, the drawers. Fast. Voice 2, Caleb, breathing heavily, agitated. Where's the damn key? Voice 1, protocol. It's on the wall hook. Stop shaking, Cal. Sound of glass shattering, followed by a muffled thud. Voice 2, I'm not shaking. Let's go. The entire operation lasted exactly 10 minutes and 20 seconds. The robbers didn't take the full reserves. They targeted the immediate cash and the contents of safe deposit boxes accessible in the main vault area, roughly $3.1 million in total. They grabbed their heavy, overstuffed duffels and vanished through the back entrance, leaving behind the acrid smell of fear and gunpowder, and a stunned silence that was worse than the noise. The immediate police response was delayed by a critical failure in the silent alarm system. Evelyn's button press had, unknowingly, short-circuited the external line. By the time the call came in from a terrified customer who had managed to crawl out, the Vance brothers were already speeding away in the Stray, hugging the coastline, aiming for the border 50 miles east. Detective Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a man whose face looked carved from granite and who smelled permanently of stale coffee, was the first senior officer on the scene. He surveyed the wreckage of the bank lobby, noting the precision of the robbery contrasted with the younger brother's clear panic. The sensory details were confusing. One robber was a professional, the other was an amateur. They used a boat, Thorne stated, watching the yacht's wake disappear on the horizon through the manager's dusty window. Ambitious and stupid. We'll have every patrol boat from here to the territorial waters on them in an hour. The brothers, however, were not heading for open sea. Their route was a pre-planned, intricate sequence. 2 hours later, the Stray pulled into a secluded, long-abandoned dock near the industrial ports of New Haven Bay, 30 miles from Coastal Ridge. The younger brother, Caleb, jumped onto the wooden pier. He quickly and shakily untied the boat. Recollection: Evelyn Hayes, years later. I remember the smell of him. Not like sweat, but like sea air and cheap cologne. He was trying to breathe normally, but he was failing. He was drowning in it, whatever it was. Elias was already pulling a large, heavy-duty tarpaulin off a beat-up, rusty box truck parked next to a stack of shipping containers. The truck was old, a decommissioned 1970s delivery model, painted a flat, nondescript gray. The smell of old engine oil and rust was overpowering. The yacht gets towed by the tide, Elias instructed, throwing the duffels into the back of the truck. Any witnesses think we went south. We go north. Get in, Cal. We have 30 miles of open road before the main highway checkpoint. June 14th, 1993, 3:15 p.m., 30 miles north of the drop-off point. The terrain changed abruptly from marshland to sparsely populated desert scrub. The heat was stifling, the air thick with dust. The gray box truck, traveling at a high speed, suddenly veered sharply. A blinding flash lit the horizon, followed by a concussive boom that rattled windows 5 miles away. A massive fireball erupted from the truck, turning the old vehicle into a twisted, smoking ruin that burned fiercely for hours. Witnesses, a pair of road maintenance workers, called in the explosion, reporting a catastrophic vehicle failure. When Detective Thorne and his new partner, the earnest and tech-focused Detective Elena Ruiz, arrived on the scene, the air still smelled of burnt metal and gasoline. The wreckage was horrific. The truck's cabin was almost completely incinerated, the metal twisted like foil. The official version of events began to form almost instantly. The robbers, overloaded with cash, had used an unstable, ancient vehicle, and a faulty fuel line or electrical surge had caused the catastrophic, fatal explosion. Case closed, tragically, but 3 things bothered Thorne. First, the intensity of the blast suggested more than just a gas tank explosion. Second, the 3 duffel bags that contained the $3.1 million were completely missing from the wreckage. No scorched remnants, no ashes. Third, despite the utter destruction of the cab, forensic teams were unable to locate any identifiable human remains beyond a few fragments, insufficient for DNA or dental records. Archive. Official Police Protocol Excerpt, June 15, 1993. Item 19. No complete human remains recovered. Small biological fragments present. Conclusion. Initial given the intensity of the thermal event, suggestive of an accelerant being present, and the proximity to the stolen vehicle, the 2 suspects, Elias and Caleb Vance, are presumed deceased. The missing currency remains unaccounted for, likely incinerated or carried off by the blast force. Case status: closed, pending recovery of the funds. The community of Coastal Ridge breathed a collective sigh of relief, though tinged with macabre curiosity. The Vances were gone. Justice, in their eyes, was delivered by fate, not law. The $3.1 million became an insurance write-off and a painful, persistent rumor. Detective Thorne never filed the case as fully solved. He looked at the presumed deceased tag with contempt. He knew the Vance brothers were capable of planning the robbery, but their sudden, fiery disappearance felt too neat, too cinematic to be true. He kept the file in a worn, brown box under his desk, checking it every few months, searching for the non-existent bodies. Young Detective Ruiz, meanwhile, was tasked with cleaning up the physical debris a week after the explosion. She cataloged the charred remnants, feeling the strange, abrasive grit of the desert dust on her gloves. She found a logical gap Thorne was looking for in a dusty paper bag containing the last, overlooked personal effects from the truck's glove compartment. Some cheap tissues, a broken pen, and a slip of thermal paper. Archive. Thermal receipt copy. Oakhaven Gas and Mart. 44 Main Street. Coastal Ridge, ID 0012. Date, June 14th, 93. Time, 12:45 p.m. Fuel, regular 15.0 gallons. Total, $19.95. Trans, ID 41,920. The receipt, a thin, almost ephemeral piece of evidence, was a physical impossibility. The explosion occurred at 3:15 p.m., 30 miles into the desert. The getaway plan required the brothers to immediately board the yacht, sail, and then switch to the truck at the docks, which was 40 miles away from Coastal Ridge. Yet, this receipt showed the truck was fueled at the Oakhaven Gas and Mart in Coastal Ridge 2 hours after the robbery and an hour before they had reached the desolate drop-off point where the stray was supposed to have delivered them. This meant the truck had either been driven out of Coastal Ridge, around the coast, and back into the town center for fuel, or most damningly, the brothers had never taken the yacht at all. The entire coastal route was a carefully constructed decoy. Thorne stared at the receipt, its dark print crisp against the white paper. The official version of events, a spontaneous failure of an old truck, was a lie. The explosion was premeditated, designed to be a cremation. But if they had stopped for gas, they were driving the truck into town. Why? The yacht was the decoy. The truck was the real first leg. And the bodies? They never went up in smoke. They simply walked away from the fabricated scene, $3 million richer, having successfully faked their own deaths. They drove right past the police barricades. Thorne murmured, a heavy, sinking realization settling in his chest. The yacht was a distraction. They were already long gone before we even searched the docks. He looked at the thermal paper, feeling the grainy residue on his thumb. This isn't a tragic accident, Elena. This is a cold-blooded vanishing act. But where did they go, and how did they trigger an explosion on a desert road 30 miles away without being the cab? The case, officially closed, had just been ripped open by a 15-cent receipt. If you're even slightly interested, subscribe because it's going to get even more interesting. You can't even imagine how the brothers remained in the shadows for 11 years. I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's move on to the continuation. The thermal receipt, now laminated and placed inside a sterile, sealed evidence bag, was the single most dangerous object in the Coastal Ridge police station. It proved beyond a doubt that the tragedy of the Vance brothers was a brilliant performance. It was a truth Detective Sergeant Marcus Thorne kept close to his chest, the secret ticking away under the mounting pressure of his impending retirement. The official case file remained stamped closed, deceased suspects, while Thorne's brown box, filled with charred metal fragments and blurry archive photos, became the sole archive of the Vance discrepancy. They had $3 million, fresh identities, and 11 years. Thorne conceded to Detective Elena Ruiz in the cramped, dust-filled archive room in July 2004. The air conditioning unit wheezed, spreading the dry smell of decaying paper and old printer toner. They planned the whole damn thing to buy time. But how did they set off the bomb miles away, out of sight? Ruiz, now a 4-year veteran, represented the new era of forensics. She had spent 2 weeks meticulously scanning and enhancing every scrap of physical and photographic evidence from the 1993 explosion site. Her patience a stark contrast to Thorne's gruff urgency. Her focus was on the old, cheap security footage from a long-abandoned trucking yard 5 miles from the blast. The film, previously dismissed as static and unusable, required her to use advanced image processing software newly available to the department. She worked in near silence, the glow of the monitor illuminating her determined face. The crucial pivot came when she isolated the final frames of the truck footage just before the catastrophic detonation. The box truck, accelerating on the desolate highway, briefly passed under a high-angle security lens. Ruiz zoomed in on the undercarriage, carefully adjusting the contrast to cut through the film's heavy grain and digital noise. It was there, a sliver of metallic paint glinting near the truck's rear axle, a tiny anomaly that lasted less than half a second. It was far too small and structured to be debris. Archive, Digital Forensics Report, July 2004, Ruiz. Analysis, Reevaluation of security footage camera ID. A4 reveals a small, metallic object attached to the undercarriage of the box truck approximately 1.5 seconds before detonation. The object exhibits characteristics consistent with a cheap, commercially available radio-controlled timing switch, Model 700 series, used for hobbyist aircraft. The metallic object confirmed Thorne's darkest suspicion. The explosion was not an accident. It was a remote-controlled demolition designed to incinerate the vehicle and any trace evidence, providing a theatrical end to their lives. The brothers had likely driven the truck to the desert spot, activated the timer, and then had a third, hidden getaway vehicle waiting nearby, perhaps in a dry wash or behind a low ridge. They escaped on foot, watching the fire from afar, their death providing them with an unchallenged head start. A simple RC switch, Thorne muttered, running a callous thumb over the paper report. The genius of it is how cheap it is. No paper trail, no fancy manufacturer, just a toy store item. The realization was heavy. The entire coastal yacht detour, the hurried stop for gas in the center of town, and the fiery wreck. It was all a meticulously choreographed stage show designed to give the Van Cess an untouchable 11-year lead. The technical breakthrough energized the detectives, but the case still lacked emotional focus. The Vance brothers were abstract shadows driven by a $3 million figure. Thorne knew that to find them, he had to understand why they chose this specific bank and this specific, vengeful method of exit. The human cost of the crime continued to plague the town. Evelyn Hayes, the seasoned teller, had been forced into early retirement by persistent anxiety and deep trauma. She became the constant, silent reminder of the town's vulnerability. Evelyn's daughter, Sarah Hayes, now a primary school teacher, agreed to meet Detective Ruiz in October 2004. They met in a small, quiet coffee shop outside Coastal Ridge, the aroma of fresh espresso and slightly burnt sugar filling the air. Sarah was reserved but held a core of quiet strength. She provided a crucial, long-forgotten detail. "It wasn't just the money," Sarah began, stirring her tea. "They knew my mother. They knew the bank manager, too. Elias dated his niece for a summer, years ago. They knew the cleaning schedules, the vault delivery days. They knew the quiet rhythms of the place." Then, Sarah revealed the deeper, more venomous layer of the Vance brothers' resentment. "My grandfather, he owned the small marina where the Van Cess worked. He was always hard on them, always critical. He foreclosed on their parents' old boat, the Wanderer, 5 years before the robbery. Elias never forgave him. The bank, Oakhaven, the money, it was all a symbol of the people who kicked them down." Ruiz felt a cold prickle of understanding. The theft wasn't merely financial. It was an act of profound, calculated psychological warfare against a community that had rejected them. They hadn't just stolen money. They had inflicted maximum trauma on the symbols of their resentment, including Evelyn, who represented the diligent, prosperous middle class. This malice explained the spectacular, staged death. It wasn't enough to escape. They had to perform a final dramatic screw-you to Coastal Ridge. They used their own pain as fuel, Ruiz murmured, realizing the depth of the case's complexity. They didn't want luxury. They wanted revenge and erasure. This shift in motive, from greed to resentment, changed the search parameters entirely, moving the focus away from exotic resorts and toward places offering anonymity and cheap, permanent camouflage. The renewed investigation now focused on the escape immediately following the explosion. Thorne and Ruiz flew to the industrial docks of New Haven Bay, where the yacht, the Stray, was abandoned. They tracked the ownership of the gray box truck and eventually interviewed the elderly, retired foreman of the shipyard, who, under pressure from a decade-old memory, finally cracked. December 2004. The foreman, an old man named Hector, remembered the Van Cess father, and he remembered Elias and Caleb showing up with the truck 2 weeks before the robbery. Hector had been quietly slipping into financial hardship, a fact Elias had exploited. Transcript. Interrogation of Hector Rivera, December 12th, 2004, Thorn. 2 weeks before the fire, Hector. Elias brought the gray truck here. What did he pay you to do? Hector, voice low, hesitant, he paid me $50,000. Cash, to have a container ready. Sealed, with an exit route cleared. The truck, it was placed inside the container. They never left the docks in the truck. They left in my old cargo van. Ruiz. They put the truck in a shipping container, but the explosion happened 30 miles north on the desert road. Hector, I didn't ask. They said they needed it moved later. A delivery. I just gave them the keys to my rusty van. They used it to drive the truck out to the desert road, armed the bomb, and drove back. They parked the van at the bus station and took the bus south. They bought the remote switch from a pawn shop across the border. Hector's confession revealed the complex three-stage escape. Stage 1, yacht decoy. Stage 2, truck and container concealment. Stage 3, bombarm truck in desert via Hector's van. The sophistication was unsettling, but it highlighted a crucial fact. The money was already compromised. Elias had paid Hector $50,000 before the robbery, a down payment for the plan, meaning the brothers had been spending their loot before they even stole it. Ruiz then focused on the money transfer. The initial offshore deposit of $3.1 million in Swiss francs had been immediately divided. A startling $500,000 was transferred in a single lump sum to a different, untraceable account 2 months after the escape, a payment to an unknown facilitator, likely the person who provided them with forged identity papers and safe passage out of the country, likely the final leg of their escape. They are not living the good life, Marcus, Ruiz noted, pointing at the transfer record. They paid a massive toll just to become ghosts. They bought anonymity, not paradise. Our targets aren't vacationing. They're hiding, scared, and significantly poorer than we thought. This was twist 3. The corruption and the cost of vanishing meant the Van Cess had been set up to be perpetually poor shadows, spending most of their stolen funds to maintain the lie of their death. The case, however, went cold again. The facilitator's account was a dead end, a digital ghost that vanished immediately after the $500,000 transfer. Thorne had exhausted the paper trail. Ruiz, now applying a strategy gleaned from modern anti-terrorism investigations, decided to hunt for a pattern of small, repeated failure, not a massive financial transfer. She reasoned that 2 men who hated their old lives would try to replicate some small, familiar comfort in their new one. She searched international banking databases, made accessible through new anti-money laundering treaties, for any recurring, non-essential, small expenditure linked to the offshore accounts that still held the remaining Vance money. She searched for small, cheap luxuries they couldn't resist. January 2005. The search returned thousands of hits. Cable subscriptions, generic utility payments, and low-cost groceries. But one stood out, a recurring, monthly charge of $12.99 for a niche, long-defunct online gaming platform based in the coastal town of Port Alva, Terra Alta. The name of the billing account was generic, but the user handle, the gaming name itself, was a devastating piece of poetic irony. Old Stray, a direct reference to their getaway boat, the Stray. Twist 4 was the single, unshakable compulsion of Caleb Vance, the younger, less methodical brother, to connect with a small piece of his past life through a childish moniker. The IP address linked to the monthly payment traced back to a small, rundown apartment building near the seafront market in Port Alva. It was a place where the scent of hot seafood, diesel fumes, and poverty mingled, far from the polished wealth of coastal rich. November 2005. Detective Thorne and Sergeant Ruiz, now working with local Terra Alta Police and Interpol, arrived in Port Alva. The air was hotter, saltier, and the pavement stickier than Coastal Ridge. The town was sprawling and faded, a perfect place for ghosts to walk. The apartment building was painted a depressing ochre, peeling in the tropical humidity. The local police confirmed the presence of 2 older men matching the vague descriptions of the Vance brothers. one quiet and stoic, the other jumpy and prone to coughing fits. They had been living under the names Elliot Smith and Carl Benson, their forged documents aging poorly, just like them. The arrest was anticlimactic, a quiet surrender. They were sitting on a dilapidated balcony, a cheap plastic chest set between them, their faces etched with the deep, corrosive exhaustion of perpetual fear. The salt air and their own isolation had successfully aged them, making Elias look at least 10 years older than his 45 years. The interrogation, held in a sterile, poorly lit room in the Port Alva police station, was the culmination of 11 years of methodical searching. The Vance brothers, once united by rage, now seemed separated by an insurmountable wall of mutual resentment. The smell of dust and despair was overwhelming. Thorne, tired but resolute, placed the laminated thermal receipt on the table. Oakhaven Gas and Mart, 12:45 p.m., June 14th, 1993. The explosion was 3:15 p.m. You stopped in your hometown after the robbery. You never took the yacht, did you, Elias? Elias Vance, the planner, crumbled first, his voice hollowed out. The yacht was the distraction. The explosion, that was the funeral. We drove the truck to Hector's container, put it inside, and drove his van out to the desert road. We armed the timer and drove away. We took a bus south into the city and met the facilitator. The timing was off, Thorne pressed, leaning in. You had 30 minutes of clean road before the main checkpoint. The RC switch had to be set for the final drop-off near the border. But it exploded early, Caleb. The younger brother, Caleb, who had been coughing into his hands, flinched violently at his name. He suddenly looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his composure finally shattering. This was the raw, pivotal moment. Transcript. Interrogation Room 3, Port Alva Police Station, November 17th, 2005, Caleb Vance. A sudden emotional outburst, tears welling. I had to. I was in the back of the van, driving. I thought I heard the siren, the whine of the motor launch. I couldn't breathe, detective. I just wanted the sound to stop, the fear to stop. I just wanted the whole damn thing to go away. Elias Vance. Coldly, without looking at his brother, he pushed the button 30 miles too early. He detonated the truck while we were still within range. That's why he's limping now. A piece of shrapnel found his foot. He ruined the clean break. The premature blast was the definitive, painful split between the brothers. Their shared crime had not brought them freedom, but 11 years of toxic proximity and mutual blame. Caleb confessed that his impulsive detonation wasn't an act of calculated self-harm, but pure, paralyzing panic. He had traded his freedom for a persistent limp and a lifetime of Elias's silent contempt. Their life in Port Alva was not one of luxury. The initial $3.1 million, once converted, was reduced by $500,000 for the facilitator, over $1 million lost in poor, desperate investments designed to hide the money and constant payments to maintain fake documents. Twist 6. They weren't millionaires. The remaining recovered money, sitting in a sterile Swiss account, was less than $400,000, a miserable sum compared to the time and lives they had wasted. They had served their own prison sentence for 11 years, a self-imposed, silent punishment. In 2006, Elias and Caleb Vance were extradited back to the U.S. and convicted on multiple counts of armed robbery, conspiracy, and faking death. They received lengthy sentences, separated and stripped of the last vestiges of their shared identity. The two men, who had sought to destroy their old life with fire, found that the truth was far more enduring than the ashes they created. The recovery of the Van Cess and the subsequent recovery of the remaining $400,000 brought a powerful, if bittersweet, form of closure to Coastal Ridge. The money helped shore up the bank's losses and funded a new, state-of-the-art community center, a physical symbol of renewal over resentment. For Evelyn Hayes, the conclusion of the case brought the ability to finally look forward. She received a formal apology from the bank and a commendation from the police department for her quick thinking in trying to press the silent alarm, the act that ultimately led to the flawed escape timeline. Evelyn, though forever marked by the robbery, slowly began to rebuild her peace. Sarah Hayes continued her teaching career, using her mother's story, without naming the family, to teach her young students about the true cost of moral choices and the long, slow shadow of consequence. She spoke of the man who ran, only to find himself imprisoned by his own guilt. Detective Sergeant Marcus Thorne retired 6 months after the Van Cess were convicted, finally feeling the heavy weight lift from his shoulders. He passed on a now-framed thermal receipt, encased in its evidence bag, to Detective Ruiz, telling her, "Never trust the story you're given, Elena. Always trust the paper trail. The truth isn't usually the fire, it's the receipt." Elena Ruiz, promoted to sergeant, often recounted the story to new recruits, emphasizing that the biggest secrets are often hidden in the smallest, most mundane details. The Vance brothers had sought to burn their past, their revenge, and their identities, but a 15-cent gas receipt and a $12 a month online gaming subscription ensured that the truth survived the fire, waiting patiently for justice. What do you think? Was the 11-year sentence of hiding and regret a greater punishment than the prison term itself? Leave your opinion in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel. It motivates us to make even better videos.